Admiral Tae-min stood in the command center of his massive warship, watching the glowing blue hologram that floated in front of him. The image showed star maps and data streams from across the galaxy. His ship was enormous, stretching for miles through the darkness of space, filled with thousands of alien soldiers ready for their next conquest. The bridge buzzed with activity as officers moved between control panels. Screens displayed information about distant worlds, and the soft hum of advanced technology filled the air. Tae-min had been leading conquest missions for over 20 years, and this felt like just another routine operation. Commander Sung-ho approached from the communication station, carrying a data tablet in his four-fingered hands. His blue-tinted skin reflected the light from the holographic displays as he shook his head dismissively. "Admiral, we've finished analyzing the signals from that small planet in Sector 7, Sung-ho reported. "It's exactly what we expected. Another backward world with primitive inhabitants." Tae-min studied the readings more carefully. The planet the locals called Earth sat in a quiet corner of the galaxy, far from any major trade routes or strategic locations. It looked peaceful from space, with white clouds swirling over blue oceans and green continents. "What kind of technology are they using?" Tae-min asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Basic electromagnetic transmissions, Admiral. Radio waves, television broadcasts, simple satellite communications. Nothing more advanced than what we'd expect from a species that hasn't even left their home planet yet." The science officer, Jun Seo, looked up from his analysis station across the bridge. "The xenobiology department has already classified them, sir. They're calling humans a Class C species. That means they're barely capable of basic spaceflight, completely confined to their single world." Tae-min nodded slowly. The Empire had encountered hundreds of worlds like this one, species that developed just enough technology to send signals into space, but never advanced far enough to pose any real threat. These civilizations usually surrendered quickly once they saw the Empire's superior technology and massive fleet. "How many ships will we need for the invasion?" Tae-min asked, already knowing the answer would be small. "Our analysts recommend a minimal force, Admiral," Sung-ho replied. "Perhaps 50 ships at most. These humans show no signs of advanced weapons or defensive systems. Their largest military vehicles are still bound by their planet's gravity." Tae-min walked to the large viewing window that stretched across one wall of the command bridge. Outside, he could see dozens of other Zephyrian warships floating in formation, their dark metal hulls reflecting starlight. Each ship carried enough firepower to level entire cities. "Prepare the minimal invasion fleet then," he ordered. "Choose our fastest ships. This operation should be completed within a few days." As his officers began preparations, Tae-min couldn't shake a small feeling of disappointment. After decades of challenging military campaigns against advanced civilizations, conquering primitive worlds had become almost boring. These humans would likely surrender the moment they saw the Empire's ships appearing in their skies. The Admiral returned to studying the holographic display, watching the peaceful blue planet rotate slowly. Soon it would become another addition to the vast Zephyrian Empire, its inhabitants serving as workers in the galaxy's great industrial machine. He had no idea that this routine conquest would become the most significant mistake in the Empire's thousand-year history. The Zephyrian invasion fleet moved silently through the cold vacuum of space, passing Jupiter's massive form as they approached the inner solar system. Admiral Tae-min's flagship led the formation of 50 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's surface. Communications Officer Hyejin sat at her station, monitoring the flood of signals coming from the small blue world ahead. Her headset crackled with dozens of different human languages as she sorted through television broadcasts, radio programs, and internet data streams. What she discovered made her pause and frown at her screens. "Admiral," she called out, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "I'm picking up some very strange patterns in these human transmissions." Tae-min looked up from his tactical display. "Strange how?" Hyejin pulled up several data streams on the main viewing screen. "Well, sir, they're fighting wars all across their planet, major conflicts involving millions of their people, but at the same time, they're creating incredibly beautiful music and art. Look at this." She played an audio file of a human symphony, its complex melodies filling the bridge. The alien officers listened in surprise as the music swelled and flowed with emotional depth that seemed impossible for such a primitive species. And here, Hyejin continued, displaying human paintings and sculptures on the screen. These artistic works show incredible skill and creativity. It's like they have two completely different sides to their nature. Science officer Dong-wook had been quietly analyzing human mathematical and scientific transmissions from his station. He stood up suddenly, his expression troubled. "Admiral, I need to show you something," he said, bringing his data to the main display. "These humans have developed mathematical theories that are surprisingly advanced. Their understanding of physics, chemistry, and engineering is much more sophisticated than we initially thought." The screen showed complex equations and scientific papers that human researchers had published. Dong-wook highlighted several sections that caught his attention. "Look at this work on quantum mechanics," he explained, "and these calculations about space-time and gravity. They figured out concepts that some of our own scientists struggled with for decades." Taemin studied the information, but his expression remained skeptical. "Yet they haven't even developed faster-than-light travel. They're still trapped on their single planet." "That's what puzzles me, sir," Dong-wook replied. "They clearly have the mathematical foundation to build advanced technology, but they seem to be applying it only to problems on their own world. It's like they're holding themselves back somehow." Lieutenant Min-soo, who had been monitoring human military communications, added his own observations. "Their warfare is also confusing, Admiral. They have weapons that could devastate their entire planet, yet they use them very rarely. Most of their conflicts involve much smaller, less destructive weapons." Hyejin nodded in agreement. "It's the same contradiction everywhere I look. They create beautiful music while fighting brutal wars. They solve complex mathematical problems, but don't build spaceships. They develop devastating weapons, but rarely use them." Admiral Taemin walked to the viewing window, watching Earth grow. Larger as they approached, the planet looked so peaceful from space, with no signs of the contradictions his officers were describing. "Primitive species always display inconsistencies," he said dismissively. "They haven't evolved beyond their basic instincts yet. Once we show them superior technology, they'll understand their place in the galactic order." He turned back to his crew. "Continue monitoring their transmissions, but proceed with standard intimidation protocols. These contradictions you're seeing are just signs of an underdeveloped civilization. But as the fleet drew closer to Earth, the strange puzzle of humanity would only become more mysterious. The morning sun over New York City suddenly disappeared as something enormous blocked out the light. A massive alien warship, nearly 10 miles long, materialized directly above Manhattan. Its dark metal hull cast shadows across the entire city as people on the streets stopped and stared upward in disbelief. Similar scenes played out across Earth as 50 Zephyrian warships appeared simultaneously over major population centers. London, Tokyo, Mumbai, Cairo, and dozens of other cities found themselves under the shadow of alien vessels that dwarfed even their tallest skyscrapers. Inside the flagship hovering over New York, Admiral Taemin watched the chaos unfold on his viewing screens. Cars had stopped moving on highways as drivers abandoned their vehicles to stare at the sky. Crowds gathered in streets and parks, pointing upward while emergency sirens wailed across the city. Commander Sung-ho stood at the communications console, adjusting the universal translator that would convert their words into every human language simultaneously. "All systems ready for broadcast, Admiral." Lieutenant So-young monitored dozens of screens, showing human news broadcasts, government communications, and military channels. "Their world leaders are trying to establish emergency contact protocols," she reported. "The panic is spreading quickly, but they're attempting to maintain order." Taemin nodded, satisfied with the initial impact. This was exactly how first contact was supposed to work. The sudden appearance of superior technology would shock the primitive species into immediate submission. "Begin the standard surrender broadcast," he ordered. Sung-ho activated the transmission array, sending their message to every radio, television, and communication device on Earth. The Admiral's voice echoed across the planet in hundreds of languages. Simultaneously, "Inhabitants of Earth," Tamin announced, his tone commanding and cold. "I am Admiral Tamin of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our domain. You have exactly 72 hours to surrender unconditionally and submit to Imperial rule. Failure to comply will result in the complete annihilation of your species and the sterilization of your planet." The message repeated several times before, cutting off, leaving Earth in stunned silence. Lieutenant So Young watched human communication networks explode with activity. Government officials were making frantic phone calls, military leaders were trying to assess their options, and news broadcasters were struggling to explain what was happening to billions of terrified viewers. "How are they responding?" Tamin asked, expecting to receive surrender terms within hours. "Their governments are meeting in emergency sessions," So Young reported. "The United Nations is attempting to coordinate a unified response. Military forces worldwide have been placed on high alert, though they seem to understand their weapons are useless against us." Hours passed as the alien fleet waited. Tamin had expected immediate capitulation, as had happened with dozens of other primitive worlds. Instead, human governments continued their discussions, while their scientists frantically studied the alien ships with telescopes and sensors. Finally, after nearly a full day, a response came through Earth's communication satellites. Commander Sung Ho received the transmission and looked puzzled as he read it. "Admiral, we have their reply," he announced. "Excellent. Are they ready to surrender?" Sung Ho frowned at his console. "Not exactly, sir. They're requesting additional time to prepare their formal response." Tamin was taken aback. In his 20 years of conquest operations, no species had ever asked for more time to surrender. They either submitted immediately or began futile. "Resistance efforts, how much additional time?" he asked. "They're asking for another 48 hours to," and I quote, "properly prepare our response to your arrival." The bridge fell silent. Lieutenant So Young looked up from her monitoring station with equal confusion. "Their military forces haven't mobilized for attack, Admiral. They're not preparing defenses or attempting to evacuate their cities. They seem to be genuinely preparing some kind of formal response." Tamin stared at the peaceful blue planet below, more puzzled than angry. What could these primitive humans possibly need to prepare that would take additional time? The final hours before the deadline ticked away, as Admiral Tamin paced the bridge of his flagship. 72 hours had passed since his ultimatum, and still no formal surrender had come from Earth. The alien crew watched their screens with growing curiosity as unusual activity began spreading across the human planet below. Communications. Officer Hyojin noticed it first. Her monitoring equipment started detecting synchronized signals from thousands of locations across Earth's surface. "Admiral, something strange is happening down there," she called out, her voice filled with confusion. "What kind of activity?" Tamin asked, moving to her station. "Every communication system on their planet is activating at once," Hyojin explained, pointing to her displays. "Satellite dishes, radio towers, television transmitters, internet servers, even their military communication arrays. They're all powering up simultaneously." Lieutenant So Young, who had been tracking human government activities, looked up from her console with equal bewilderment. "Sir, their world leaders aren't in their usual command centers. Instead, scientists and engineers from every nation are gathering at communication facilities. Through the viewing windows, the alien officers could see lights flickering across Earth's night side. As communication networks activated in perfect coordination, it was unlike anything they had witnessed during previous conquests. Usually, primitive, species either surrendered immediately or launched desperate, unorganized attacks. "Are they preparing some kind of final broadcast before surrendering?" Commander Sung Ho wondered aloud. Science Officer Dongwook monitored the energy readings from the planet's surface. "The power consumption is enormous, Admiral. They're channeling electricity from power plants across their entire world into their communication systems." Tamin felt a growing unease. In 20 years of conquest operations, he had never seen such coordinated activity from a primitive civilization. Most species either collapsed into chaos or attempted futile military resistance when faced with superior technology. Suddenly, every alert system on the bridge activated at once. Hyojin's equipment detected a massive transmission spike from Earth, unlike anything in their records. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission," she reported, her voice uncertain and almost whispered. "But it's not what we expected." "Put it through," Tamin ordered, expecting to hear desperate pleas for mercy or formal surrender terms. Instead, what filled their screens left the entire alien crew staring in stunned silence. The transmission wasn't a message in the traditional sense. There were no words, no voices, no desperate diplomatic appeals. Instead, Earth was sending pure data directly to every ship in the Zephyrian fleet. Mathematical equations, scientific formulas, and complex theoretical frameworks streamed across, their displays at an incredible rate. Commander Sung-Ho watched the data flow with growing amazement. "Admiral, this isn't a surrender. They're sending us knowledge." The information kept coming in perfectly organized streams. Human discoveries in physics, mathematics, chemistry, and engineering filled their computer systems. Art, music, literature, and philosophy followed in carefully structured data packages. It was as if the entire accumulated knowledge of human civilization was being transmitted directly to them. "How is this possible?" Lieutenant So-Young asked, watching the data counters climb higher and higher. The coordination required to organize this transmission would need their entire planet working together. Tamin stared at the screens, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Never in the Empire's 1,000-year history had a species responded to an invasion threat by sharing their knowledge with their would-be conquerors. "Sir," Yejin said quietly, "this transmission is reaching every ship in our fleet simultaneously. They somehow calculated our exact positions and are targeting each vessel with precision." The Admiral felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service: genuine surprise. These humans weren't begging for mercy or launching hopeless attacks. Instead, they were calmly demonstrating capabilities that shouldn't exist. In a primitive civilization, what exactly had the Empire stumbled upon? Science Officer Dong-Wook's hands moved rapidly across his analysis console as streams of human data continued flooding their systems. Sweat beaded on his blue-tinted forehead, despite the cool temperature maintained throughout the ship. What he was discovering challenged everything he thought he knew about primitive civilizations. "Admiral, you need to see this immediately," he called out, his voice shaking with disbelief. "This transmission isn't just random information, it's a carefully organized library of everything humans have ever learned." Tamin hurried over to the science station, where multiple screens displayed complex diagrams, equations, and data structures. The information was arranged in perfect logical order, starting with basic mathematical principles and building up to incredibly advanced theoretical concepts. "Look at this section on physics," Dong-Wook said, highlighting a portion of the data stream. "They've solved problems that our own Imperial Academy has been working on for decades. Their approach to quantum field theory is not just different from ours, it's more elegant and complete." Lieutenant So-Young abandoned her communications post to join them at the science console. Her eyes grew wide as she scrolled through sections of human mathematical research. "These proofs are extraordinary," she whispered. "They've discovered relationships between numbers and space that I've never seen before." She pulled up a series of equations that seemed to dance across the screen with mathematical beauty. "This theorem about infinite series, our best mathematicians would need months just to verify if it's correct. But the way they've presented it makes the logic so clear." Commander Sung-Ho studied a different section of the transmission, focusing on human technological blueprints. "Their engineering designs are fascinating," he observed. "They show solutions to problems we didn't even know existed." Dong-Wook opened another data stream that made him step back from his console in shock. "Admiral, their understanding of space-time curvature goes beyond anything in our Imperial database. They've theorized ways to manipulate gravity that we never considered possible." The science officer's hands trembled as he accessed more sections of the human archive. "They've included their research on energy manipulation, matter transportation, and even theoretical frameworks for faster-than-light communication. But none of these technologies appear to be actively used in their civilization." Lieutenant So-Young discovered something even more puzzling in the cultural sections of the transmission. "They've sent us their art, music, and literature too," she reported. "But it's not just random samples. They've chosen pieces that demonstrate complex emotional and intellectual concepts. She played an audio file of human music that filled the bridge with haunting melodies that seemed to tell stories, without words. This composition uses mathematical relationships in sound that create emotional responses. It's like they've figured out how to turn mathematics into feelings. Admiral Taemin stared at the screens in growing confusion and concern. How did a species we classified as Class C develop knowledge that surpasses our own empire's understanding? Dong-wook pulled up the classification reports they had received about Earth before the invasion. According to our reconnaissance, they should barely understand basic spaceflight. Yet this transmission contains theories about interdimensional travel and energy sources that could power entire star systems. Commander Sung-ho noticed something troubling in the technological sections. Admiral, some of these blueprints show designs for weapons that could destroy planets, but there's no evidence they've ever built such devices. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans possessed knowledge that could revolutionize galactic civilization, yet they appeared to be deliberately limiting their technological development. Why would they share this with us? Lieutenant So-young asked quietly. If they understand these concepts, they could have built defenses against our invasion. They could have developed weapons to fight back. Admiral Taemin looked at the peaceful blue planet, visible through the viewing windows, realizing that everything they thought they knew about Earth was completely wrong. The emergency meeting convened in the flagship's main conference room, where Admiral Taemin's senior officers gathered around a circular holographic table. The room's dim lighting cast shadows across their concerned faces as they struggled to understand what they had discovered about Earth. Science Officer Dong-wook stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence replaced by visible anxiety. Multiple data screens surrounded him, displaying sections of the human transmission that had been analyzed over the past several hours. Colleagues, what I'm about to share will challenge everything we believed about this species, he began, his voice heavy with implications. These humans have developed mathematical concepts that are genuinely more advanced than our own imperial science. He activated a holographic display showing complex equations that seemed to shimmer in the air above the table. This formula here represents their understanding of quantum entanglement across vast distances. Our empire's best physicists have been trying to solve this exact problem for over 300 years. Communications Officer Hyejin leaned forward, studying the elegant mathematical structures. How long did it take them to develop this knowledge? That's the most disturbing part, Dong-wook replied, pulling up historical data from the human transmission. According to their own records, they discovered these principles within the last 50 years. Some of these breakthroughs happened in just the past decade. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Commander Sung-ho was the first to speak. 50 years? Our empire needed centuries to develop similar theories, and even then our understanding isn't as complete as theirs. Lieutenant So-young accessed another section of the human data archive. It gets worse. Their technological development timeline shows incredible acceleration. They went from basic flight to nuclear energy in less than 50 years, from nuclear energy to quantum computing in another 30 years. She projected a timeline that showed humanity's rapid progress through various technological stages. Look at this pattern. Each breakthrough leads to faster subsequent discoveries. They're not just learning quickly, they're learning how to learn faster. Admiral Taemin studied the timeline with growing unease. The Zephyrian Empire had required thousands of years to achieve similar technological milestones, with long periods of stagnation between major advances. What about their population and resources? He asked. Perhaps they have advantages we didn't account for. Dong-wook shook his head grimly. Their planet has a smaller population than most of our major worlds, and their natural resources are actually quite limited compared to typical empire planets. Yet they've achieved more scientific progress in 2 centuries than some of our member civilizations accomplished in 10,000 years. Communications Officer Hyejin pulled up cultural analysis data that painted an even more complex picture. Their social structures are fascinating too. They have thousands of different languages and cultures, yet they somehow coordinate global scientific research projects. Their diversity seems to accelerate their innovation rather than slow it down. Commander Sung Ho examined the human artistic and philosophical works included in their transmission. These creative works show incredible depth of thought. They're not just technically advanced, they're exploring concepts about existence, consciousness and reality that our philosophers still debate. The weight of realization settled over the senior staff. Lieutenant So Young voiced what everyone was thinking. We classified them as a Class C primitive species, but they may actually be the most intellectually advanced civilization we've ever encountered. Admiral Taemin walked to the conference room's viewing window, staring down at the blue planet that had suddenly become far more mysterious and potentially dangerous than anyone had imagined. If they're this advanced, he said quietly, why are they still confined to their single planet? Why haven't they expanded into space like every other advanced civilization? Dongwook's expression grew even more troubled. Admiral, I think that might be the most important question of all, and I suspect the answer is going to be even more disturbing than what we've already discovered. Lieutenant So Young worked through the night, diving deeper into the massive archive of human knowledge. Her eyes were red from staring at screens, but what she discovered made her forget all about fatigue. At 3 a.m. ship time, she made a discovery that would change everything. Admiral, she called out, her voice echoing through the quiet bridge. You need to see this immediately. Wake everyone up. Within minutes, the senior staff had assembled around her workstation. So Young's hands shook as she pulled up classified sections of the human transmission that had been hidden within seemingly innocent scientific papers. I found something buried in their physics research, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Look at these theoretical frameworks for faster-than-light travel. They're not just theories. These are complete engineering specifications. The holographic display showed detailed blueprints for spacecraft engines that could bend space-time itself. The designs were elegant, efficient, and far more advanced than anything in the Zephyrian fleet. Commander Sung Ho leaned closer to examine the technical drawings. These specifications, they're complete down to the smallest components. This isn't theoretical research. This is a fully developed technology. But here's the shocking part, So Young continued, opening another data file. According to their own internal documents, they developed this technology 30 years ago. They could have been traveling between stars since before most of us were born. Science Officer Dongwook studied the timeline data with growing amazement. If they had this technology for 3 decades, they could have established colonies across hundreds of star systems by now. Instead, they chose to stay on their single planet. Admiral Taemin felt a chill run down his spine. Why would an advanced species deliberately limit themselves to one world? So Young opened more hidden files that revealed the truth. They've been watching us, Admiral. All of us. The Zephyrian Empire, the trading federations, every major galactic civilization. They've been intercepting our communications, learning our languages, studying our military tactics and political structures. She displayed communication logs that showed decades of careful surveillance. Human listening posts had been quietly monitoring alien transmissions from across the galaxy, building detailed profiles of every spacefaring species. They know more about our empire than some of our own citizens do, she continued. Our trade routes, our military capabilities, our political weaknesses, even our cultural preferences. They've been preparing detailed intelligence reports on every major galactic power. Commander Sung Ho examined the surveillance data with growing alarm. They know exactly how many ships we brought to their system. They know our weapons capabilities, our standard invasion procedures, even our typical surrender demands. The implications were staggering. Lieutenant So Young opened one final file that made everyone in the room step back in shock. This is a complete strategic analysis of galactic civilizations, she explained. They've identified every major military power, mapped alliance structures, and calculated the likely outcomes of various conflict scenarios. They've been preparing for contact with galactic civilization for decades. Admiral Taemin stared at the strategic documents that showed humanity's deep understanding of galactic politics and military power structures. The humans hadn't just been learning about alien technology. They had been studying alien psychology, predicting how different species would react to various situations. They knew we would come, he realized, his voice hollow with understanding. They knew exactly how we would approach their world, what we would demand, and how we would underestimate them. Dong-wook pulled up more evidence that painted an even more disturbing picture. Their apparent primitiveness wasn't accidental. They deliberately maintained the appearance of a Class C civilization while secretly developing advanced technologies. They wanted us to see them as an easy target, the E. Truth hit Admiral Taemin like a physical blow. Earth was never a primitive world waiting to be conquered. It was an incredibly advanced civilization that had been patiently setting a trap, waiting for the galaxy to make the first move, and the Zephyrian Empire had walked directly into it. The EWAP, massive Zephyrian warships, floated silently above Earth, their crews staring at screens filled with impossible data. What should have been a simple conquest had turned into the most confusing moment in their empire's history. Captain Taemin rubbed his forehead as he studied the reports flooding in from every department. His invasion fleet had come expecting to find humans using primitive rockets and basic computers. Instead, they discovered a civilization that had been quietly developing technologies that made even Zephyrian scientists nervous. "Sir, you need to see this," called out his communications officer from across the bridge. Her voice carried a mixture of amazement and worry that made everyone turn to listen. The young officer pulled up holographic displays showing human research facilities hidden deep underground and in remote locations. These installations have been operating for decades. The humans could have announced their advanced capabilities to the galaxy years ago. They had the technology to contact us, to join galactic civilization as equals. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. But they chose not to. They waited. They watched us approach their world, and they stayed hidden until the very last moment. The science officer, a veteran researcher who had studied countless alien civilizations, stepped forward with his own disturbing findings. His hands moved through the air, manipulating data displays that showed human technological achievements. "Admiral, what we're seeing here goes beyond anything in our databases. Some of these human innovations could change everything we know about physics, medicine, and engineering. Imagine energy sources that could power entire star systems, or medical treatments that could extend lifespans by centuries." His expression grew darker as he continued. "But there's another side to this. The same knowledge that could heal and help could also be weaponized. Some of these technologies, if turned toward destruction, could threaten not just individual worlds but entire sectors of the galaxy." Admiral Taemin walked slowly to the main viewing screen, looking down at the blue and green world below. Earth looked so peaceful from this distance, its white clouds swirling over continents and oceans. But now he knew that beneath that calm surface lay capabilities that could reshape galactic civilization. The weight of the decision before him felt enormous. His original orders had been straightforward: evaluate the human military threat and either negotiate tribute or prepare for conquest. Simple military problems had simple military solutions, but this was no longer a simple military problem. The humans had demonstrated something that worried him more than any weapon: patience and strategic thinking. They had developed incredible technologies while carefully hiding their true capabilities from the rest of the galaxy. They had watched Zephyrian ships approach their system and had chosen to reveal themselves only when absolutely necessary. This suggested a level of long-term planning and self-control that few civilizations possessed. It meant the humans weren't just technologically advanced. They were politically sophisticated. "What are your recommendations?" the Admiral asked his senior staff. The room fell silent as everyone realized they faced a choice that would echo through galactic history. They could try to force humanity into submission, risking a war against an opponent whose true capabilities remained unknown, or they could attempt negotiations with a species that had already proven they could keep secrets from the entire galaxy. Either path carried enormous risks for the Zephyrian Empire. The bridge of the Zephyrian flagship had never been so quiet. For several tense minutes, every officer stared at their screens, processing what they had just witnessed. Then, cutting through the silence like a blade, came a simple message from Earth. The transmission was short, direct, and somehow more intimidating. than any battle cry could have been. "We've been waiting for you to find us. We have much to discuss." Admiral Tamin felt something shift in his chest as he read those words. There was no anger in the message, no threats or demands, just a calm statement that carried more weight than a fleet of warships. The humans had been expecting this encounter all along. He looked around his command bridge, studying the faces of officers who had served with him through dozens of successful campaigns. These were seasoned warriors who had seen civilizations rise and fall, but now they looked uncertain, almost small, as they gazed down at the world below. The communications officer broke the silence first. "Sir, how do we respond to this? It was a good question. Standard Zephyrian protocol had procedures for dealing with hostile civilizations and cooperative ones. There were rules for managing tribute negotiations and conquest operations, but there was no manual for what to do when you discovered that your intended target had been quietly surpassing your own civilization for decades. They're not primitive," the science officer said quietly, still studying the data streams coming from Earth. "They never were. While we've been expanding our empire through military conquest, they've been advancing through pure research and development." The tactical officer, usually quick to suggest military solutions, remained silent. What was the point of discussing weapons and battle strategies when facing an opponent who had chosen not to reveal their true capabilities until the perfect moment? Admiral Tamin realized that everything about this mission had changed. His fleet hadn't discovered a new world to add to the empire. Instead, they had stumbled upon a civilization that had been patiently observing galactic politics while developing technologies that could reshape everything. The humans had achieved something remarkable. They had combined two traits that rarely existed together: incredible patience and relentless intellectual growth. Most civilizations that focused on research became weak and vulnerable. Most that remained hidden became stagnant and backwards. But humanity had managed to do both while staying strong and advancing rapidly. "Send a diplomatic response, Admiral," Tamin ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Request formal contact protocols." Commander Sung Ho, his second-in-command, nodded slowly. Both men understood what this meant. The Zephyrian Empire had arrived as conquerors, expecting to add another primitive world to their collection. Instead, they would be leaving as visitors, who had been granted an audience with a superior civilization. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Humanity had won this encounter without firing a single shot, without building massive fleets, without making threats or demands. They had simply waited, learned, and grown stronger, while the rest of the galaxy had dismissed them as unimportant. For centuries, Earth had been the galaxy's best-kept secret. Now, as the Zephyrian fleet prepared to begin formal diplomatic contact, that secret was finally ready to change everything. The patient vigil was over, and a new chapter in galactic history was about to begin.